Why does the silence get louder every time you try harder? You send the message. You wait. You read it back 5 times before you even hit send. Then nothing. So you write another one, add a little more warmth, a little more proof that you care. And somehow, instead of pulling them closer, you watch them drift further away. If that has ever happened to you, stay with me, because by the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why that happens, and more importantly, what actually works instead. Right now, it probably feels personal. It feels like you are being rejected, like you are not enough, and that feeling pushes you into motion. You think, maybe if I explain this one more time, they will finally get it. You think, maybe if I show enough love, enough patience, enough effort, they will finally feel safe enough to stay close. But almost everything you are doing right now is being driven by fear, not strategy. Fear of losing them. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being replaced by someone who tries less and somehow gets more. And fear rushes you. It makes you want to fix things immediately. It convinces you that if you do not act right now, you will lose everything for good. So you react. You send the long message. You hold on tighter. And here is the part that stings the most. The tighter you hold on, the faster the other person slips away. Because you are not dealing with someone who responds well to pressure. You are dealing with someone whose entire nervous system is built to run from it. People who avoid closeness do not process emotional intensity the way you do. When things get heavy, they do not lean in, they lean out. So when you finally go quiet to teach them a lesson, it does not destabilize them, it gives them room to breathe. When you beg for an explanation, it overwhelms them. When you chase, it activates the exact instinct that makes them want to disappear. And now you are stuck in a loop. You reach, they retreat. You try again, they go silent. You push a little harder, and they vanish completely. Every cycle of that loop chips away at something inside you. You start questioning your own judgment. You start believing you are too much, too intense, too needy. But you are not too much. You are simply trying to give love in the way that makes sense to you, to someone whose system was never built to receive it that way. To you, love is supposed to be spoken, expressed, confirmed out loud. But to someone wired for avoidance, love often feels safer from a slight distance. So the moment you move closer, thinking you are building something, they feel like they are losing control of their own internal safety. And control to them is everything. That is the real reason behind the silence, the slow replies, the sudden need for space. It is rarely because they do not care. It is because closeness, real closeness, triggers something in them that feels unsafe before it ever gets the chance to feel good. Here is where most people accidentally destroy the whole thing without realizing it. They take that distance personally. They assume it means rejection, that it is already over. So they react emotionally, and that very reaction becomes the new reason the other person pulls back even further. What could have been a slow, steady connection turns into something that feels like emotional overload, and nobody wants to stay inside overload for long. Think about the pattern honestly. Every time they pull back, you try to fix it faster. Every time they go quiet, you get louder. But what if that response is the exact opposite of what actually works? This is the part almost nobody tells you clearly. You cannot chase someone whose instinct is to run. You cannot manufacture emotional safety through pressure because pressure and safety cannot exist in the same place. And the longer you keep trying, the more of your own power you give away, because slowly, your attention stops being about your own life and becomes entirely about their replies, their mood, their next move. And that is exactly where the real damage begins, because now you are not living, you are reacting. And people who avoid closeness can feel that shift instantly. They feel the urgency underneath your words, and instead of rising to meet that pressure, they step back even further, colder, quieter, leaving you more confused than before. But here is where everything starts to change. The moment you actually see this pattern clearly, instead of living inside it, things start to make sense in a completely different way. It is not about saying more, doing more, or proving your worth all over again. It is about understanding what genuinely works and what quietly kills attraction without you ever realizing it was happening. Because right now, without meaning to, you might be feeding the exact cycle that keeps pushing them away. And until that changes, nothing else will. Not your words, not your effort, not even your good intentions. What makes all of this harder is that silence from someone like this rarely feels like a clean answer. They almost never say, "This scares me," or "Closeness makes me deeply uncomfortable." Instead, they get vague. They say they are busy. They seem completely normal one day and unreachable the next. And that confusion is exactly what keeps you emotionally stuck, because the human mind struggles far more with uncertainty than it does with actual pain. When something feels unclear, your brain goes searching for meaning anywhere it can find it. It replays old conversations. It builds entire stories out of almost nothing. That searching is often where obsession quietly begins, not always from deep love, sometimes simply from the absence of closure. This is where avoidant dynamics become especially dangerous for people who feel things deeply, because your heart wants honesty, and your mind wants certainty, but their pattern offers you neither. So instead of chasing connection, you end up chasing clarity, and clarity cannot be pulled out of someone who has not even learned how to sit with their own emotions yet. That person might genuinely care about you, but if they have never learned how to tolerate emotional discomfort, every real feeling becomes something to outrun instead of something to sit with. To you, it looks inconsistent and confusing. To them, it feels like survival, because closeness gets misread by their nervous system as pressure, as something heavy enough to threaten their independence. If you do not understand that pattern, you will misread almost everything about it. A lot of people who avoid intimacy grew up absorbing one very specific lesson early on, that needing people is risky. Maybe they had to become independent far too soon. Maybe vulnerability was met with silence instead of comfort. So, somewhere along the way, they built an internal rule that says, "Do not depend on anyone. Do not get too attached." Even now, when they meet someone genuinely good, that old rule still runs quietly in the background. So when your warmth reaches them, part of them wants it badly, and another part of them wants to bolt. That internal tug-of-war is exactly what produces the hot and cold pattern that leaves you mentally drained. This is also why trying to prove yourself almost never works the way you hope. But healing does not happen simply because someone else loved harder. A person can be deeply cared for and still remain emotionally unavailable, and that is one of the hardest truths to accept. Because effort feels noble, sacrifice feels romantic, waiting feels loyal. But loyalty without self-respect quietly turns into self-abandonment, and most people do not notice that shift until they are already running on empty. They stop sleeping properly. Their mood begins depending on whether a notification appears. And that is not love anymore. That is a kind of captivity, where your own nervous system becomes hostage to someone else's inconsistency. It can feel like passion in the moment, but underneath it, it is usually anxiety wearing the costume of love. Real connection should not keep you in a constant state of confusion. Real connection should not require you to earn basic emotional presence over and over again. And this is exactly where your power starts coming back. The moment you stop romanticizing the very thing that is destabilizing you. Because if someone only feels comfortable when they are far away, the problem is not your closeness. The problem is their unprocessed fear. And that distinction matters enormously. Once you understand that, you stop turning their behavior into your identity. You stop telling yourself, "I was not enough," and you start recognizing they simply were not equipped to handle this yet. That single shift alone can protect your peace more than anything else. Because the deepest damage in situations like this rarely comes from someone leaving. It comes from what you start believing about yourself while they are pulling away. You start shrinking, doubting your own value, quietly editing your emotions to seem easier to manage. You become less honest, less expressive, less yourself, all just to avoid triggering more distance. That is exactly how people lose themselves, slowly, one unsent message at a time, until one day you realize you have worked so hard to keep someone comfortable that you have become a stranger to your own self. If someone can only stay close when you ask for nothing, feel less, and expect very little, What they actually want is not partnership, it is convenience. And you were never built to survive on emotional leftovers. You were built for something fuller, something steadier, something genuinely mutual. But before any of that can happen, you have to break the spell first. You have to stop treating their distance like a puzzle you are personally responsible for solving. Because the moment you start treating avoidance like a riddle to crack, you hand all of your power away. You become consumed by timing, by wording, by overthinking when to speak and when to stay silent, and your entire life starts orbiting around someone who cannot even offer you basic consistency in return. The truth is, you do not need more effort right now. You need emotional discipline. You need the strength to stop feeding a pattern that is quietly starving your own peace. The answer begins the second you stop reacting in the old, familiar way. And once that shift actually happens, the entire energy around the situation changes completely. That change begins the instant you stop trying to control the outcome, because real power here is not found in making them come back. It is found in refusing to lose yourself while they figure themselves out. Most people assume strength means saying the one perfect thing, the single message that magically makes the other person understand everything at once. But that belief is exactly what keeps people trapped, because it still places your peace entirely in someone else's hands. It still has you waiting for them to choose you before you are willing to choose yourself. And that is precisely where everything needs to shift. The strongest move available to you is not louder emotion. It is self-control. It is feeling the urge to chase and choosing not to. It is watching your mind spiral toward panic and staying grounded anyway. That stillness is not weakness, it is mastery, because most people simply cannot do it. Most people are ruled completely by emotional impulse. They send the text within seconds. They check the profile one more time. But real growth starts the moment you stop using action as an escape from discomfort. That is what emotional discipline actually means. Not pretending you do not care, not turning cold, not playing manipulative games. It simply means refusing to betray your own peace just because someone else has gone quiet. And when you genuinely do that, something powerful starts happening inside you. Your nervous system begins to settle. You stop feeding the panic. You stop making someone else's inconsistency the center of your entire emotional world. That single shift changes your energy more than any perfectly worded message ever could. Because the moment you stop reacting, you stop being predictable. And predictable panic is exactly what avoidant patterns quietly rely on without ever saying so out loud. They are used to being chased. They expect the long message. They expect the pressure. So when none of that arrives, when there is no dramatic goodbye, no collapse, something genuinely shifts. For maybe the first time, they are left completely alone with their own thoughts, and that silence feels different. Not punishing, not cold, just clean. Just solid, simply free of pressure. That kind of quiet carries real weight, because now they are not reacting to your emotions anymore. They are sitting with your absence on their own, and that often lands deeper than people expect. Not because silence is some clever trick, but because genuine detachment reveals something pressure never can. Whether there was ever real depth there to begin with, or only a cycle of dependency dressed up as connection. That is why the most effective thing you can possibly do is often the hardest thing to do, which is nothing. Not from weakness, from power. Not because you are giving up, but because you are finally stepping outside the pattern, and patterns lose their grip the moment you stop feeding them. Think about how much energy gets burned trying to decode every single move someone makes. How much of your life quietly disappears into waiting. How much self-worth gets traded away for a few seconds of temporary reassurance. Now imagine reclaiming all of that energy for yourself. That is where your center of gravity finally returns to you. And once you return to yourself, your entire presence shifts. You become calmer, steadier, far less available to chaos, and that kind of energy is rare, and it does something powerful in almost every human interaction. It creates contrast, because people rarely feel your value fully while you are constantly trying to prove it to them. They feel it instead when your energy stops being so easy to access, not because you became distant or fake, but because you became rooted. Playing games comes from ego. Stepping back with dignity comes from self-respect. They notice when your attention stops chasing them. They notice when you stop trying to force closeness that was never going to be forced into existence. And that is usually when real curiosity quietly begins, not because you demanded importance, but because your silence demonstrated it on its own. This is something many people completely miss. The energy of someone who is emotionally steady is deeply attractive. Not loud, not dramatic, not desperate, just stable. Because stability creates safety, and safety is something avoidant people rarely know how to build for themselves. Yet they feel it instantly when it is genuinely present near them. So when you stop reacting with panic and start holding yourself with calm strength instead, you shift the entire emotional atmosphere around the situation. The dynamic stops being built on your fear and starts being built on your boundaries. And boundaries are powerful precisely because they are quiet. They simply say, I will not abandon myself just to keep this connection alive a little longer. That one internal decision alone can reshape your entire life, because from that point forward, you stop trying to be chosen at any cost, and you start becoming someone who only stays where peace is actually possible. That is a completely different level of self-worth, and when self-worth rises, desperate energy naturally fades. You stop reaching out from emptiness. You stop confusing access with genuine love. So if they do eventually come closer, it will not be because you chased them into noticing you. It will be because your grounded absence made room for reality to finally speak for itself. And reality is always stronger than pressure. Reality shows people exactly what they are missing and reveals the real difference between emotional chaos and emotional maturity far better than any argument ever could. That is why stepping back is never passive. It is one of the most active forms of self-protection you will ever practice, because it demands patience, it demands control, it demands the courage to let truth reveal itself without your constant interference. Most people would rather force a quick answer than sit inside genuine uncertainty. But real transformation begins the moment you can hold that uncertainty without betraying yourself in the process. That is exactly the point where your power returns fully, and once it does, the entire dynamic stops controlling you the way it used to. And once that control settles back into your own hands, everything becomes far clearer than it ever was before. Because now you are no longer reacting to what they do, you are simply observing it. When you are reactive, every small change feels loaded with meaning. Every delay feels heavy. Your emotions rise and fall completely based on someone else's behavior. But once you shift into observation instead, you start noticing patterns without being swallowed by them. You notice how they show up, and you notice how they vanish. And for maybe the first time, you stop asking, how can I fix this? And start asking instead, is this actually right for me? That question alone is powerful, because it moves your focus away from winning someone over and toward protecting your own peace instead. If they eventually come back around, you will see it through a completely different lens now, not as some kind of victory, not as validation, but simply as information. You will watch how they return. You will feel the actual energy they bring with them. You will notice whether anything genuinely changed, or whether it is simply the same old cycle wearing a slightly different outfit. And this time, you will not be blinded by hope, you will be steadied by awareness, because once you step outside of emotional chaos completely, it becomes remarkably easy to recognize the moment it tries to pull you back in again. You will feel it physically, that slight tension, that subtle discomfort you used to override before just to keep the connection alive. Now you actually listen to those signals because they were never weakness, they were always guidance, quietly showing you what your mind kept explaining away. That is how you protect yourself without becoming cold in the process. You stay open, but aware. You stay kind, but firm. You stay present, but no longer attached to a specific outcome. That balance is rare, and it changes everything. Because if they reach out now, you are not desperate for their attention anymore. You are simply evaluating their presence. You are no longer asking, do they want me? You are asking instead, do they actually meet me where I now stand? That single shift alone can save you years of unnecessary emotional pain. The real goal was never to make someone choose you in the first place. It was always to choose whatever feels genuinely healthy for you. And once you start living from that place consistently, your standards naturally rise. You stop accepting confusion as something normal. You stop accepting distance disguised as love. You stop tolerating inconsistency simply because you got used to it, because you have now tasted what it feels like to be centered fully within yourself. And once you taste that kind of peace, you cannot unsee whatever disturbs it afterward. From here, there are really only two directions this can go. Either they begin moving closer in a way that feels genuinely stable, or they remain exactly where they have always been. If they move closer, you will notice the difference immediately. There will be more effort, more presence, more consistency, not perfection, but clear intention. And real connection is never built on guessing games. It is built on mutual effort that moves in both directions naturally. You will not need to chase it, decode it, or beg for it. It will simply meet you halfway on its own. But if nothing changes, if the same distance continues, if the identical pattern keeps repeating itself, you are no longer confused about any of it. You are clear. You stop asking, "Why are they like this?" and start accepting instead, "This is simply who they are right now." And that kind of acceptance is not defeat at all. It is freedom, because you finally stop waiting around for potential. You stop investing in a version of someone that only ever existed inside your own imagination. Instead, you face reality exactly as it is, not harshly, not emotionally, just honestly. And honesty brings a particular kind of peace because it allows you to make decisions that actually align with your own well-being. You no longer stay simply because you are hoping things will eventually change. You stay only where what already exists genuinely feels right. And if it does not, you walk away without bitterness, without needing one final explanation, because you already understand more than enough. You understand that real connection should never cost you your own stability. You understand that love should never feel like one long, unanswered question. You understand that your energy holds genuine value, and wherever you choose to invest, it ends up shaping the entire direction of your life. You become more selective, more grounded, more intentional with where your heart actually goes. You stop chasing intensity and you start choosing peace instead. And that is exactly where everything shifts for good. Because once you stop accepting emotional instability as some kind of normal baseline, you finally create room for something better to enter your life. Something calm, something clear, something real. Not something you have to fight for every single day, but something that simply meets you where you already are. And maybe the most important part of all of this, you no longer need anyone to come back in order to feel whole again, because you have already returned fully to yourself. And that is a kind of power nobody can ever take away from you again. Not silence, not distance, not rejection, because your sense of self is no longer tied to whether someone else shows up consistently or not. It stands on its own now, steady, grounded, completely unshaken. And from that place, everything you allow into your life from now on becomes a genuine choice, not a desperate need. And that is the exact moment your life actually begins moving in the right direction.